Let me now introduce our next panel coming on up. Anita Adalja, we've just figured out a new hashtag for her, which is City Garden Diva. Anita, come on up. Hunter Biden, chairman of the board of the World Food Program. John Boyd, president and founder of the National Black Farmers Association. Randy Russell, president of the Russell Group. Anita, why don't you just sit right there? I should mention that Anita is the farm manager as well of the Arcadia Center for Sustainable Food and Agriculture. And we're going to talk now about the changing face of farming. And I guess I want to start with you, John. Yes. Is the face of farming changing?
I think it is.
You do?
I think that in order to feed the growing population, that there's going to be a need for more small-scale farmers. Doing more non-traditional type agriculture and farming. You know, years ago there was one type of farmer. You know.
Now, why is the need there? I mean, I just want to check because I know that's what's happening. I'm just wondering if that's happening because we're a rich society and we've got a lot of time on our hands and people like the hobby of farming, but less rich societies need other challenges. So is this just an avocation of wealth? That I'm going to have my herb garden, or Anita's going to figure out how I can have an herb thing. Is there something bigger driving that than just?
I think that there's more of a need coming from America for more healthy food, more organic food. People want to know now what they're eating. You know, what's in their food. What this food made of? Is it GMO or non-GMO? People are more health conscious of what's going into the food and what they're eating, and that's what we're hearing from. From most of America.
Anita, what do you think about this? You've got the coolest bio. She co-founded Seeds to Feed Rooftop Garden in Brooklyn. She finished a farming apprenticeship program at UC Santa Cruz Center for Agroecology. I mean, you're like really into cities having farms. Didn't we create cities not to have farms?
Yeah. So I guess my perspective with farming is I approached it through. I was a social worker before I started farming, so I look at farming and food in terms of food access and bringing foods in the community. So the face of farming is changing, but I absolutely think it must change in terms of, when we're bringing food into low-income communities, predominantly of color, it matters what that person who's producing that food, who's distributing that food, what that person looks like. There's an inherent mistrust in a lot of what John Boyd's saying in terms of GMO, but also in if you look at in DC, let's take DC for instance, in Wards 7 and 8, there's one grocery store for 70,000 people, but in the more affluent areas, there's one grocery store for 12,000 people, right? So food and race are related, absolutely, and that's something that I think needs to be talked about and, addressed if we want to, start increasing food access. And I think that's a conversation that's often, we talk about we need more food. People are interested in where their food comes from and more healthy food, but how do we get that food into communities? And it's not just growing it, it's also looking at the social component.
Randy, you represent, you're the most powerful ag lobbyist in Washington, there was this Shakespeare Theater fundraiser where I played the role of Big Pharma, and I used the Darth Vader voice. So I could, we could call you Big Ag and maybe use it. But I mean, how do you feel, you represent a lot of large players, how do you look at this face of farming? And really back to my first question, and not to be facetious, because I do think it's sort of cool that, and I understand the notion, my colleague Corby Kummer is a big advocate of knowing where your food comes from, locally growing, and it sounds healthier. The question is, I don't know if it really is healthier, and I know that you work with Monsanto and a lot of others, so what's your take on the changing face of farming?
Well, Steve, first of all, thanks for the nice promo.
Yeah, great, yeah.
I'm sure that we'll put that up on our website tomorrow.
Yeah.
Blasting it out in social media as we speak. First of all, thanks to Atlantic for putting this on, and thanks to Elanco for sponsoring it. I think it's a great event. Just a couple of statistics. We talk about the changing face of agriculture. According to the latest ag census, we've got 2 million farmers in this country. 90% of them produce less than $350,000 a year in gross sales. And they only produce 25% of the output.
These are micro.
So that means 10% of our farmers, about 400,000 or less, produce 75% of our output. Wow. And that number is growing. The number of larger farmers are growing. And yet the total number at 2 million had been falling pretty rapidly. That's starting to level off because of these niche markets that have developed. And look, I embrace all forms of ag. We need organic, we need conventional, we need biotech. But I also find it interesting in the recent Chicago Council on Global Affairs did a survey of consumers, and they came back, and far and away the two things they cared most about was affordability, price, and the quality and the nutritiousness of the food. Way down the line after that were things like antibiotic-free, non-GMO, et cetera. So I think that's an important point to make. And then finally, I would just say, I'm going to lift this up a little bit for you. There we go. That's one good job. There Thank you, Steve. And then finally, I would just say, to the point John made, and for those interested in organic, we have a national organic program. It's put in place in 1990, and there are rules out there that allow you to, if you meet those rules, you could put a label on your product that says organic. We don't have a federal standard for sustainability. We don't have a federal standard for non-GMO. We don't have a federal standard for antibiotic-free. We don't have a standard for national.
Should we?
So, well, I think that that's a debatable point, and because companies, rightly or wrongly, this is marketing tools, and they put it on there, but do consumers really know what they have? And I think there is some merit to talk about having some certified programs so people can have confidence in what they know in their eating.
John, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, I do. I think that there's very little conventional seed out here on the market. So when people say that they don't grow a GMO brand, it's probably not so, because the local dealers around the country and around the world now carry solely just about a GMO product. But as a farmer, if I buy a Monsanto seed, I have to tell the company how many acres I'm planting, where I'm planting this seed at, and it can only be used one time, and I have to buy the seed again from Monsanto or DuPont or Syngenta, whatever that seed company may be. So I have to provide all of that information as a farmer to grow that product. I think that the American people should know what's in their food. If I'm growing this crop, then you should have the opportunity to see what's on that product and the final product that shows up in the supermarket. And then it should be your choice whether you purchase that product with a GMO trait in it, or you buy an organic brand. But I think mothers that have children, they should have that opportunity to choose.
I want to come to Hunter Biden in a minute. I want to just to ask Randy, you know, when we look at the population growth globally, and you look at the population growth we're set up in the United States, I've always been, despite my facetious comments at the beginning, amazed by super farms, that they're amazing to visit, they're amazing to go and see what they produce. As you look at and you scale out, and your clients look out and scale what's going to happen with the population in the United States and around the world, it seems to me that you're going to have super farms to deal with it. I understand the micro farms are a key part of it, but what do you think the carrying load capacity is when you begin thinking about the population that's coming online as we add the next billion, next 2 billion people?
So Steve, here's the global food challenge and also the global food opportunity here in the United States. We're going to add 2.3 billion more people the next 40 years.
Right.
We're going to have to feed more people the next 40 years than we have the last 10,000 combined. That's a heck of a challenge that we all have in the global food and ag space. 80% of that population growth is going to be in developing countries. Now we're going to have to do that by increasing food production 70%, and we're going to have to do that with no appreciable increase in arable land around the world, and probably with significantly less, probably up to 70% less water. That's a challenge. And we're all going to have to work together to do that, and that means we're going to have to embrace all forms. Yes, it's entirely doable, but we're going to have to do things like invest more in ag research, woefully underfunded here in the United States and around the world, in order to meet that challenge.
Hunter, how do you fix that challenge
one
you
of
just
the
laid
things
out?
I think that a little bit of the segue into what I know just enough about to be dangerous, but not enough to match the knowledge that surrounds me here, is that increase in population, 9 billion people by 2050. It will require those super farms we're talking about. It's going to require advances in technology that we're talking about. But 1 in 9 people go to bed hungry every night around the world. And what the World Food Program, I'm the chairman of the board of the World Food Program
I mean, they're going to hungry now before you've added on.
Before you've added on. But the fact of the matter is, it's not a lack of food. It's a lack of access to food. And one of the things that you said, small-scale farmers, it may be that, and I don't know enough to know, that it is a lifestyle choice or a choice of people wanting to know where their food comes here in the U.S. or in more developed countries. But small-scale farmers make up the vast majority of those who go to bed hungry every night. Most of them are children, but most of their parents are small-scale farmers. And what World Food Program has done, with the help of the Gates Foundation and Warren Buffett, who started a pilot project in 20 countries about 5 years ago, Randy?
5 years.
It had incredible success in the Purchase for Progress program that we put together. And basically what that is taking these small-scale farmers, providing them access to markets, and the initial market being the World Food Program. And in many ways, Anita, like some of the stuff on a similar scale that you're doing in cities with farmers and giving them access to markets and creating kind of a new marketplace for them. We do the same thing, and we've reached hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, largely women. And the reason that women are the key to this is, number one, they are, in terms of those that go to bed hungry, they are the vast majority of that. And they are the largest providers to their families, not the men. And once you put women into the mix, you can increase yields. I think the FAO said by 20 to 30%, and bring 100 million people out of hunger within the next 10 years. And so, all of the stuff that Randy's talking, I think it is absolutely incumbent upon us to realize that it's going to be a real mix. It's going to be a mix in which we're going to the large super farms are, because right now the United States provides almost 40% of all the funding to the World Food Program, both in commodities and in donations.
Who's your next biggest donor?
The next biggest donor is probably the entirety of the EU, and then it kind of goes down the list.
Interesting.
Yeah.
One of the questions that I'm interested in on the international front, when you talk about global hunger and trying to get either new patterns in cities or smaller farms coexisting with big farms, is that in talking to Cargill's raised some really interesting questions about the solvency of our food aid. That you can go into a crisis in Africa or Latin America, wherever it may be, and that a lot of food is dumped in, but it actually wrecks the economics of small farming. And so you end up having this tidal wave of product that comes in that's not locally produced or sourced, and they're trying to advocate for something that's more sensible, that balances immediate needs but doesn't throw off the dynamics of farming. Is that, Randy, is that something your members or your clients are thinking about?
Well, Steve, there's a huge debate about that, as
Yeah.
you know. And when Raj Shah was the head of USAID, he had some proposals about cash versus commodities.
Right.
And it's very divisive. The ag community, those that produce wheat and corn and soybeans, want to maintain the commodity portion of the food aid, and I certainly get that. Look, I think there's some middle ground here on this issue. I think that there's absolutely some middle ground where we can protect a base amount of commodities under our U.S. food aid, but also be responsive to the fact that in emergency situations, we may need to use cash. One of the concerns you have to look at on this is if you put our commodities into their markets, what kind of incentives does that give for local production? Does that end up depressing prices for local producers, and does that give them the kind of incentive you need? At the same time, let's face it, such proposals are going to have to go through the agriculture committees, and so we're going to have to find some middle ground. And I'm confident if we sat down and hashed it out, we could find that middle
It's just
ground.
something I'd never heard of before.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. Yeah.
But one of the things to keep in mind is that this debate, and I agree with Randy 100%, is that you're going to have to find middle ground. But the idea that there was some nefarious intent in terms of creating subsidies in the post-World War II, We rebuilt Europe with those subsidies at a time in which there was no farming in Europe. We rebuilt, we provided through Dr. Borlaug and his interventions in Latin America and in China, we brought billions of people out of poverty and out of hunger. And those policies that have been set in stone for as long as they have are going to take some time to reform. There is need for reform, but it's not as if that this is just because of greed or just because of people's unwillingness or lack of care about those that are going hungry. It's just going to take some thought. And so one of the things, for instance, is Purchase for Progress, is what the World Food Program is doing through the Gates and Buffett work that they, in terms of the grants that they gave to WFP to do. Another thing is what Raj did and what the State Department and the Obama administration did through Feed the Future, which is changing the way in which we are distributing, providing access to that food,
So that it can
bringing
live
up
with
small-scale
sustainable farming. So
That's exactly
you know,
right.
John,
Yeah.
you're a farmer. I mean,
Yes,
Anita,
I am.
you are too, but you're a farmer. So what are your thoughts on the balance between aid and getting a farm economy right?
I agree with both of these gentlemen. You do need some common ground. But I think on a bigger picture, with my own membership within the National Black Farmers Association, 58% of our membership are over the age of 60. We need more young faces into farming and agribusiness if the next generation is going to come along and produce and feed the world. And there's not enough focus or emphasis from media talking about this issue. There's not enough meat on the bones with USDA programs to really get young people interested into farming. How do they get into farming?
Is it a good life?
I would say yes. I think I've lived
I mean,
a great...
isn't that part of the problem? Is that
I lived a great
No, he
life.
looks great. I mean, part
I
of the
lived a
question is,
But
see
you
this-
work hard. You
but
gotta work hard.
You see the same issue in long-time manufacturing communities where you've had generations of people in manufacturing, and then America hollowed out a bit, and now the kids that are being asked to come back into manufacturing, parents say, you ought to become a lawyer.
But you know, Steve-
and so the question is, do you feel it's a good enough life that you can go out and market and inspire young people to come back into it?
Let me touch on them. I know you want to jump in on it. The issue here is access to credit, which is why you don't see more young people jumping into farming hand and feet here, so to speak. Local banks are no more geared up towards agriculture and making rural loans. Yes, we have the United States Department of Agriculture, who has some of the best programs in the world, but they can't do it on their own. When farmers come in, they say, "Oh, well, those programs are already maxed out." These are some of the issues that we need. We need more banks, more than national top 10 banks, geared up to really start supporting small-scale farming, around the country. I raised 300 acres of grain, 100 head of beef cattle. I'm still considered a small-scale farmer. I'm still a small-scale farmer. I'm a drop in the bucket for the guys who are out there raising blocks, which are 1,000-acre, increments. So we need more emphasis on the small-scale farmers, period. We need to reach out to more women farmers. I mean, there are more women farmers, believe it or not, than there are men because they outlive men. Women outlive men and they inherit the farm. And
Hey, John.
so we really need programs
I know you've
to start
talked to
looking at
every
that.
United States president since probably Franklin Roosevelt. I don't know, but
Jimmy
you've talked
Carter.
Jimmy Carter. Okay, so
Tell him
you've
my
talked
age.
to every U.S. president.
Tell him my age.
Which one do you think got it?
Jimmy Carter,
Okay.
best president in history on farming. Understood farming and agribusiness better than any president in the White House. And I love them all. I mean,
Before I jump to cities and Anita, Randy, you're
I
going to
like
talk
them
about
all,
you.
but he was more knowledgeable of farming.
I won't comment about Jimmy Carter.
I know you won't, but
Randy?
You know, as I look
We may
around,
disagree on
as
that one.
I would. As
Right.
I look around the room here, I see a lot of young people. Now, then again,
How many of you are farmers? Oh, cool. Wow.
good.
that's all.
Wow,
And-
that's great.
And you know what's really interesting? You ask about the future, and John talked about it, I think, very well. If you look at enrollment in our land-grant universities, it's exploding. Our young people realize, probably maybe even better than their parents like me, that there is an extremely bright future for U.S. ag and for global ag. If you look at these trend lines, yeah, you can say that's an enormous challenge. If I'm a young person, I look at that as an enormous opportunity. Look at Purdue, record enrollment. You look at Iowa State, record enrollment. Look at UC Davis, they've had to add dorm space. They had record research.
Fascinating.
Now there are more women the last 5 years enrolling in undergraduate and graduate degree programs in ag, broadly defined. Marketing, ag economics, ag production, ag engineering, ag sciences, than there are men. So I think our young people are embracing this opportunity. I'm just telling you, if I were starting my career all over again 38 years ago, I would double down on ag because the future's bright. People are getting jobs when they get out of school. A lot of taking nothing away from being a lawyer, taking nothing away from being a banker, but if you want a job, there's plenty of them in the ag and food space as we go forward.
Anita, let me jump from the more rural form of ag to city farm and what you've been able to accomplish in urban. I'm just interested in whether you see farming and ag as part of the evolution of cities having more soul. Because you talk about food and food production in a different way than just solving, basic needs.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to, just before I answer that question, I just wanted to kind of echo what they're saying in terms of, these land grant universities. I think it's also interesting to note young and even, older people getting into farming from merging their careers or leaving their careers to pursue farming. So the farming apprenticeship program that I did at UC Santa Cruz is actually for folks who have finished, they're either finished with their college or graduate careers or are changing careers and going into farming, and that enrollment has increased tremendously as well. So there's a lot of professional farming programs out there that young and old alike are pursuing as well, so it's really promising. But in terms of urban farming and growing in spaces as the next step in terms of access, I feel like, I don't know, right now I farm on, I guess it'd be a suburban size farm. It's very small in comparison to larger scale farms, but
it's a former plantation, I'm reading, right?
Exactly, so it's
Quaker
in northern Virginia woodlawn plantation. Now, if you take a look at that site, it's about 1.5 acres in production. Now, that's not very large, but the amount of food that we're able to get out of that space is a tremendous amount. So we farm it really intensely using sustainable methods. So taking that model and applying that into urban areas, and I know in DC where land prices are a lot higher, it's not as accessible to get spaces like that, but looking at rooftops, looking at vacant lots, even if they're set for development, farming them in the time that they're around or that they're available, it's not necessarily an answer to increasing food going into urban areas, but it increases awareness. It is kind of getting people interested in where the food's coming from, having those conversations. That's, to me, absolutely necessary in the starting point of bringing food into communities. So,
Debbie Stabenow this morning said, and I was surprised by this, that there are 77 schools in Detroit that have urban farming programs. So farms at the school, and the kids learn to farm, and they bring the product they're growing. We were just in London for City Lab, and one of the tours was essentially into the tunnels beneath London, where abandoned tunnels, particularly during the Blitz and World War II, they have these underground tunnels where they've got light strung in and they're growing herbs and they've got gardens underground, which sounds really cool. It sounds like similarly to some of what you've been trying to promote and incentivize, that there are different ways to think about this. The question I have is, if you begin to dot a city, and we all know that urbanization is going to continue, we're going to take this massive population, do we need new methodologies to think about it where this is built in as not a boutique or accident or side hobby, but it becomes much more of a plan?
Yeah, I think there is a lot, in terms of urban farming, there's an intention too, and we talk about young people or people going into farming, but who are those people who are going into farming? At least from what I'm seeing, they're typically privileged, upper class, middle class, white people. And in 2040, we're going to have more brown folks in this country ever, right? So we need brown people to start farming, people of color to start farming. In urban areas, that's where, I'm seeing a lot more higher concentrations, particularly where urban farms are going in communities of color. And it's really impactful to see, this very vibrant farm growing lots of produce, and who's farming it? A brown woman, a black woman, and that's going to be inspirational. That's going to bring people, young people interested in farming and enrolling in these programs that you're seeing predominantly white folks farm.
Before I go to the audience, John, when you go out and talk to audiences, particularly audiences of color, do they get it? Are they excited and turned on by this? Or is there some show and tell place where people can say, wow, this is a neat opportunity to get into?
I think the urban farm is starting to catch on, and I hope it continues to catch on because my grandfather used to say, God bless those who can grow a garden. You never starve to death. So I would like to see more people get into urban farm and farming. But one thing I did want to touch on was the land grant universities.
Right.
The 1890s and 1860s schools are so underfunded where they're not receiving any support from Congress. It's hard to get initiatives into the Farm Bill for funding. Those schools are struggling. They're closing up. And I've been working for decades trying to get more funding for 1890s and 1860 schools so that they can thrive and serve those communities that they're in as well. So there's so much work to do, and we need more forums like this where we can start having those types of conversations and bringing these types of minds together. There's some great minds up here. And with these kind of minds, you can come up with new programs and new thoughts and new initiatives to get people involved and get them motivated. One of the hardest things I have is getting some of our younger generation into farming because they saw their grandfather struggle so bad to hold on to the land and didn't have access to credit. And they have such a negative a picture of farming. I'm trying to turn that into more of a positive. Land ownership is the most powerful tool that you can possess. If you own some land, you're able to go to the bank and borrow some money and do some other creative things. But if you don't have it, it's very hard to get. So for those families that have land, hold on to it and do something with it, something positive with the land.
You've been out saying that if you inherit Granddaddy's farm, don't sell it.
Don't sell it.
Yeah.
Oh yes, sir. That's
read.
one of my mottos, and I used a mule to relate to African American farmers. Everybody over the age of 50 knew what a mule meant to black people. 40 acres and a mule, whether it came to pass or not, I used it as a stepping stone and a visual effect so people would begin to look at the decline of African American farmers across the country. Today we're less than 1%. We have about 43,000 African American farmers that make a living by farming. We have 109,000 members in 42 states. Many of them are landowners where they're not actively farming, where they have timber on the farm or they're leasing the land to a larger scale farmer. I would like to see some of those landowners stop leasing their property and start doing more creative projects like this young lady is doing. These are certain things that they can do with their property that don't cost a whole lot of startup and machinery and equipment, and that's why a lot of small scale farmers don't get into farming. It's because of the initial upfront costs that they would have to purchase the equipment and all the necessary machinery to get into farming.
You know, I just want to say before I go to the audience, I was reading about Anita, and she works on a farm, if this is correct, a former plantation owned by Quaker abolitionists, and they hired free slaves to farm and had an integrated school. And I wrote next to this, because I used to work for Richard Nixon in the latter years, what could not so cool people also be part of this equation? You know, that it sounds like you have a very holistic, healthy picture of the future, but is it something more ruthless types like myself could benefit from?
I mean, absolutely. I'm not sure.
I'm joking. Let me open up, particularly those that are farmers. Are you a farmer? I saw your hand go up earlier. Yes. Yeah, that's great. You're a hobby farmer.
Out in Prince William County.
Cool.
But I'm also
What do you grow?
I grow a garden and I raise chickens for my own family. But I'm also the executive director of the Congressional Hunger Center.
Oh, great.
And I'm excited to see this panel acknowledge the role that racial and gender equity plays in solving global hunger and the role of financing. And what's frustrating me sometimes is coming to events like this and seeing all the agriculture people together, or going to other events and seeing all the folks focused on racial equity together, or conversations around financial inclusion. So how do we start to broker more conversations around the systems change that needs to happen to actually improve the lives of people most affected by hunger?
Quick thoughts, Randy? Yeah.
Shannon, great question. I think the first thing we need to do is stop criticizing each other's forms of ag. You know, I think we just defined this great challenge in this ever-changing consumer marketplace. And so I think the very first thing we need to do is respect each other's rights to, if you want organic, you should have organic. You should have that opportunity. If you want non-GMO, you should have that opportunity to purchase that and people grow it. If people want to talk about sustainability, I think we ought to get together and figure out what a good definition of sustainability is, certify against it, and get there. But what I'm finding in our world, it is so polarized. Maybe it just follows the world that we live in today, but people are criticizing each other's form of ag. Look, I just said it, we're not going to solve the global food challenge with any one form of ag. And I think the diversity of the marketplace today and what consumers want and their ability to pay and wanting to know where their food is grown. We don't even have a definition when you go into the grocery store and it says locally produced. What's the definition of that? Does that mean in the Washington metropolitan area? Does that mean a 750-mile radius to Chicago? Does it mean to California? What about the bananas you're buying? We don't produce those in the United States, so those surely are not locally grown. So I just think to some degree we got to be willing to accept each other's viewpoint and stop demagoguing one another and find a common ground.
I try bananas, but every winter it just doesn't work. Anita?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think I really respect what you were saying about, respecting everyone's different ways of agriculture and way that we're growing food. There's so many. Right now, I think this panel is about what are the issues, what are the questions, and trying to work together to find solutions. And I think for me, personally, it's been eye-opening because I'm so set in the communities that we're working in and where we're bringing food in to not look at, the other countries and other models and how, how access is working there and how we can apply those models and how we can all learn from each other. So that's been really helpful.
Hunter, John, quick thoughts?
Well, I don't think I have anything other to say than, the idea that we talked about before, I think it's just about finding, let's find one thing that we can all agree on. And whether that's, for instance, not only financing domestically, but also the need for financing it internationally, which is a huge piece of what small-scale farmers are facing as the biggest hurdle to success. And those are mainly women. And so what are two things that we can agree on? We need better access to financing, and we need better access to financing, particularly for women, not only domestically, but internationally. Let's start there.
John?
I think working together, like this gentleman was talking about, that's one of the biggest obstacles of the past to keep agriculture from working together. We have to find a common line where we can work together. And we have to be able to get some of those changes in the Farm Bill. That's where those changes will be implemented, no matter what, whether you like the Department of Agriculture, you love them or you hate them, they still guide agriculture in the United States, and we need to work together to get more programs in effect for small-scale producers. I've been losing that fight for 35 years, so I need some help, and I would like to work with everybody here to get better programs.
You're director of the Congressional Hunger Caucus? Hunger Center. Hunger Center. Okay, I just wanted to... We'll get back to that. I just wondered how high hunger was. What's that?
I said a big deal in our world.
Big deal in your world. On whether we have members of Congress, and maybe I misheard that for which that's a priority. It would be interesting to know. We had a question, comment over here, I think. Nope. Oh, yes, right there. Oops. Maybe I just saw you. Casey, you want to ask a question?
I'm okay.
Okay, good. Any other questions or comments over here? Yes, right here in the front. Hi. Tell us who you are.
I'm Maria Godoy with NPR. And I wanted to ask you, for all the panelists really, do you think that urban farms can ever be a really major player in terms of where our food comes from? Or is there real value more in getting people reconnected with how food is grown and where it comes from?
Anita, can I start with you on that?
Sure. I think that's a great question. It's actually a question that I don't have the answer to for sure. I definitely think, it plays that huge important role, like I said, in connecting folks to food. But I've been impressed on a regular basis in terms of how much food is coming out of urban areas, especially when you're innovative. I know in New York City there's these very, very large production rooftop farms where thousands and thousands of pounds of food are being produced. I think if we had, what we need is quantity. If you are to, really get the food using only urban farms to get food into communities, we would just need a heck of a lot of them, for sure.
Hunter?
Well, I won't pretend to know nearly as much as everybody else on this panel about this, but what I think it is important about it is awareness more than anything. And just from my perspective, I have a good friend in the audience here, Bettina Stern, who is made me more aware. She's opening up a restaurant in Georgetown that is all, I think, organic and locally grown for tacos, and that is right off.
What's the address?
Yeah. What is the address? Yeah.
3207
But
Grace.
that's not a shameless plug for my friend, but it really is.
I'm really hungry and I want to go.
She's made me more aware of where my food comes from, and she's made my children more aware of where their food comes from, and why it's important where the food comes from, how it's grown, what it means, and it gives them a level of consciousness.
But it is an
about
awareness
it.
raiser, right? I mean, it's
totally.
useful to. I mean, I admire John's work tremendously on looking at, African Americans and other people of color getting into farming. It sounds like a way to a lot of other forms of health. I also know that Randy's clients are going to be vital to fixing the hunger and food problem for a 9.5 billion.
Yes,
This country is going to be 500 million people. We're going to add 130 million people over the next couple of decades. That even in the United States. If you go to McDowell County, West Virginia today, and you go and you look there. I don't know, anybody been to McDowell County, West Virginia and gotten out? McDowell County, West Virginia is a very, very poor county in the United States. And one of the things that's there is that people market in food past expiration dates. It's a terrible thing. That's happening in the United States, just a couple of hours away from here. And there may be other places like that. So the food dilemma or hunger dilemma is one that's as domestic in many ways, but we don't look at it as one. And my question to you about whether urban farms are a hobby was a facetious one, because I know how important they can be.
Yeah.
Other quick question. Do we have one in the back here? Yes, right here. Do you have a restaurant opening up in Georgetown?
Hi, I'm Natalie Tallis with the National Farm to School Network.
Oh, cool.
I was just wondering, you touched on a little bit the need for more funding for land-grant universities, but do you have any other thoughts on other policies that could be changed that would improve opportunities for new farmers to get involved?
Farm to School program. It needs funding. That's one of the initiatives that we've been working on, is having our membership work locally with local schools and working with the Food and Nutrition Service Program and getting them integrated locally, because that's a local base. That's a local a source of income for that farmer where there's not a transportation need. Every community has a school there, and they need local and fresh vegetables. So we've been working on that initiative, and we formed a partnership with Chrysler to provide scholarships for young farmers to start to do just exactly what you're doing. And this is the first year, and we hope that we can get more Fortune 500 companies involved and providing scholarships and working to fill that niche.
Randy, let me ask you just as we close out here, I'm going to get everyone's final thoughts, but I'm interested in particular whether or not in your industry, the bigger side of the industry, there are developed accredited apprentice programs, because that's another way to sort of bring a population in, is to train folks and give them economic opportunities. Is that happening in ag?
Well, several of our clients have intern programs where they bring people in, and oftentimes those people end up getting hired by those firms. So it's a great opportunity for them. You look at the graduation rates from some of these land-grant universities now. I was looking at Purdue, 86% last year of those with undergraduate degrees got jobs in their degree program. Mm-hmm. In this day and age, there aren't, as a parent, I'd love for all of my kids to be able to graduate with a degree in the area that they actually went and studied, other than football games on Saturday, and find out that they actually got a job in the field that they studied. So there's just great opportunity here, Steve. And back to, can I just comment about the farm to school connection? I was chief of staff at USDA. I was also a deputy assistant secretary for economics, and I think that's one of the more successful programs we have. When you have such a small percentage of the total population that lives on the farm, there is a total disconnect that we see. Our own kids don't understand it. And to have that ability firsthand for kids to experience what producers, whether they're urban, whether they're, semi-rural, or actually like in John's neck of the woods in South Hill. I think it's a great opportunity for them to have a much better understanding of not only where their food comes from, but how it's produced, and gain an appreciation for it. So I applaud you for what you do.
Thank you. And to John and Anita, 30 seconds each, and I'll come to Hunter next, but you two, if you could move one thing to make a strategic shift in changing the face of farming in the way you think is important, what do you need to do that?
More young people. I would love to see more young people enter farming and agribusiness. So when you leave here today, go home and talk to your children
Yeah.
and your grandchildren about taking a second look at farming and agribusiness.
Anita?
More young people of color that are representing the communities we're serving, where our food absolutely needs to go in this country.
Do you see it's happening?
I see it's happening, but not as much as it should for a lot of reasons, but I think we're moving in that direction.
And Hunter, I know you're obsessive about solving this hunger problem around the world. I'm interested in sometimes when we talk about problems, that we do so, in a way that looks forward to the future, that 5 years from now, what will we have to have done to solve the problem you're trying to do? So how do you most move the needle on what you're trying to solve?
I think focused on women. The single greatest advance that we could make is provide access to women and small-scale farmers around the world. They will change the way in which their communities are fed in exponential ways. And so there are a lot of things going on at World Food Program. I would love the World Food Program to go back to simply being there to respond to a crisis, emergency, whether it's a civil conflict or a tornado or a hurricane, and be in a position where people within these communities that we are feeding now will be able to feed themselves.
Fascinating. It's been a privilege. I think it's right that we have a conversation like this a little bit more often. This group had a lot of edges and covered a lot of territory, small territory and very big, massive territory. So I want to thank Anita Adalja, Hunter Biden, John Boyd, Randy Russell. Thank you all so very much for.
Thank you.
Thank you.